In the first scenes, we see a man crying somewhere in the mountains. After calming down a bit, the man headed into the forest. By his appearance he resembled a savage and used a bow for hunting. This time the man missed, only slightly wounding a mountain goat, which meant he would go without dinner. Spotting a frog on a rock, the man realized it was his chance. He roasted the meat over a fire. The next morning, he showed symptoms of poisoning. Seeing a candy wrapper on the shore of a mountain river, the man realized that civilization was near. By nightfall, he indeed reached the nearest town and entered a store at a gas station. His fearsome appearance unsettled the cashier. The man filled his basket with food, but the problem was that he didn't have a wallet. The savage tried to negotiate with the cashier, offering to trade his axe and fur for the groceries, but the frightened cashier insisted that the items must be paid for with money. When another worker came out of the back room and started chasing the savage away, a fight broke out. After pinning his opponent to the floor, the savage took the goods and simply walked out. Meanwhile, a guy named Musa, along with his accomplices Simon and Bashir, was driving down a mountain road. They didn't notice a deer ahead and got into an accident. Since Musa was in the back seat, he got off relatively lightly, unlike Simon and Bashir. Limping, Musa wandered into the forest with a bag in his hand. Martin had set up a tent in the forest and snacked on chips stolen from the store. After a nap, Martin practiced archery. Despite everything, he hadn't given up all the comforts of civilization, such as headphones and a music player. Seeing an unconscious guy with a head injury on the ground, Martin poked him with a stick. Musa immediately woke up, startled by the savage. Martin said he had a mobile phone and offered to call an ambulance, but Musa refused. Since Martin had a first aid kit, he was ready to try stitching up Musa's leg wound. The guy agreed to go with the savage. In the camp, Martin got to work. He had never done anything like this before, acting purely by intuition. Unable to bear the pain, Musa screamed. Martin tried to distract him with conversation while continuing to stitch. Finally he finished. They could only hope there would be no infection. Martin bandaged the wound, proud of his work. Musa revealed that this was his first hike. Martin in turn shared that he had been living here for about 10 days. He was so fed up with the routine that he decided to abandon civilization and live in the forest as a hermit. It was a last resort. Over the past few years, Martin had tried all kinds of extreme activities, but nothing saved him from depression. Only nature gave him a true sense of freedom. Musa's bag contained a lot of cash, but Martin didn't need to know that. Officer Oand arrived on a call to the gas station store. The employees claimed they had been attacked by a Dane who looked like a Viking. By the way, Musa was wanted by the police, but he clearly didn't match the Viking description. On the roadside in the mountain forest, the police found a wrecked car. Oand immediately realized that the gang they were looking for had been here. A crumpled banknote on the car seat confirmed Oand's suspicions. Musa asked Martin how long he planned to live in the forest. Martin replied that he was there for good. Civilization had exhausted him so much that it made him realize the meaning of life lies elsewhere. Martin made an improvised cane for Musa. Musa told him about a village called Gudalen, where everyone lives like Martin, without electricity or other conveniences. Musa claimed he was heading there. This made Martin think. However, when he searched Google Maps, he found no information about a village called Gudalen. As soon as Martin turned on his phone, his wife called. She had no idea where her husband really was. The whole time Martin had been lying, saying he was on a business trip. He couldn't talk for long and, blaming the bad connection, promised his wife to call back later. Suddenly shouts were heard. Hiding behind a rock, Martin watched as 2 police officers grabbed Musa and handcuffed him. Grabbing his bow, Martin ordered the officers to release the guy. Thinking the police had mistaken Musa for him, Martin tried to explain that the incident at the gas station store was a misunderstanding. Now Martin intended to go to Gudalen with Musa. Quickly grabbing everything they needed, they left. The officers couldn't stop them because they were handcuffed to each other. Suddenly Martin's discarded phone rang. Meanwhile, the men walked through the forest. Martin confessed that he had robbed the gas station store the day before, and it was wrong. But Musa managed to convince Martin that this is exactly what real tough men do. That's why they needed to go to Gudalen. Next we see a couple arguing during their car ride. The guy tried not to take the words of his pregnant wife seriously, but she became more and more heated, calling him selfish. Seeing 2 men hitchhiking on the roadside, the driver decided to show his altruism right then. These men looked threatening, so the woman asked her husband not to let them into the car. Out of spite the guy did the opposite, but when he realized they really should get out of here, it was already too late. Simon and Bashir said they were looking for their friend with a bag. The couple assured that they hadn't seen anyone. The men demanded the driver give them his phone, but the mobile signal was weak in the area. They asked how far Gudalen was. Even though the driver tried to object, Bashir got into the back seat of the car, making it clear they weren't going anywhere. Then Simon threw the man out of the car and drove off. The woman who remained there cried in fear. Eventually Bashir insisted that Simon let her go. Seeing his two colleagues in handcuffs, Oand realized they had failed. They told him they had seen a Viking protecting Musa. The officers had already called Martin's wife. Officer Eigel refused to continue the search for the Viking because his wife and children had been waiting for him at home for a long time. Officer Tor, however, stayed with Oand. Even at night, the Viking case was stuck in Oivand's mind. It was amazing that someone would voluntarily give up civilization and live in the forest. He couldn't help but wonder what that would be like. Right now Oand feels very lonely because his wife passed away. When night fell, Musa and Martin set up camp. After gathering branches for the fire, Martin asked the new friend about his life. Musa shared that he had a son who was turning 2 the day after tomorrow. Sadly, Musa hadn't seen his child since he was born, and now he deeply regrets it. Martin urged Musa to remember how ancient people lived. Originally, women were meant to raise children and create comfort. In his opinion, men weren't made for family life. The next morning, they continued their journey. They had to cross a fast-flowing mountain river. Musa offered to go around, but Martin was confident they could make it. He threw one of the bags across to the other side, but it fell into the water and was swept away by the current. This made Martin agree to take the long way around. At the police station, the so-called Viking's wife arrived with their 2 daughters, Sally and Luna. Anne did not understand anything, claiming her husband had gone to a seminar. The sheriff's questions only confused the woman further. Oand asked if Martin could be a danger to anyone. When she saw the photo of her husband dressed as a savage from the gas station surveillance cameras, Anne was utterly shocked. The sheriff told her that yesterday Martin had threatened 2 police officers with a bow. Either he was mentally ill, or he had gotten involved with a local gang. Musa felt like they were walking in circles, but Martin declared they didn't need a map because real men could use natural landmarks. Musa felt exhausted and terribly hungry. Taking out a gun, he aimed at a mountain goat. Now at least they would not be left without supper. And couldn't believe what she was hearing. On top of that, the daughters kept asking where their father was. Anne was barely holding herself together. In the parking lot, Sally's pet rabbit escaped because of her. The search was fruitless, and the girl cried. Unable to hold back, Anne cried too. The way the husband had treated her felt horribly unfair. Meanwhile, Martin continued to enjoy his life of freedom. Musa said they needed to keep moving because Gud Allen was waiting for them. Along the way, they came upon a breathtaking view. Seeing small dots in the distance, Musa said they were almost there. Soon the men arrived at the village, where everyone truly looked like Vikings. They were greeted by Henrik, the leader here. Martin felt like he was made for this kind of life. Martin and Musa looked around the village. Some people were involved in crafts, others in military training. In short, everyone was contributing. Martin met Kristen, a pretty meat seller. But when Kristen asked Martin to pay for the meat with a card or cash, he realized that it was all just a farce. Musa had cash, so he paid for the meat, but Martin no longer wanted to eat it. He had stolen food, obviously purchased from a supermarket. Henrik publicly accused Martin of theft. Martin in turn accused Henrik of not being a real Viking. Henrik threatened to call the police, which enraged Martin, but he couldn't take on the crowd alone. Musa stood up for the friend, pulling out his gun. He sincerely didn't understand why grown men were dressing up in furs and putting on this whole show. It seemed they simply didn't have any real problems. Forcing Henrik to hand over the keys to his car, Martin and Musa fled. Meanwhile, Simon and Bashir were still hunting for Musa, having settled in a motel. Henrik reported the theft of his BMW to the police. His iPhone was also in the car. Oand asked Henrik why people were living this way. Henrik explained that tired men and women came here to live like Vikings, away from their daily routines. Oand saw it as a cheap performance. In reality, it had nothing to do with the way savages lived. The police planned to track the fugitives using Henrik's phone in the car. Musa and Martin broke into a house, but unfortunately there was no food here. Musa's wound was hurting more and more. Martin was going to take Musa to the ferry and then return to the camp. At that moment, Musa confessed that he was involved in illegal business. He was a courier. After the accident, he decided to flee into the forest with all the money. Musa regretted not telling the truth from the beginning. Now he wanted to convince Martin to stop playing this Viking game. This angered Martin. He used to have everything, a big house, a wonderful wife and children, but Martin could no longer endure the daily grind. That's why he chose to give up everything and live in the forest. The police found them. Martin rushed to escape. Thor chased after the pseudo-Viking but lost sight of him. However, Oand was determined to continue the search no matter what. Musa drove off in Henrik's car. Realizing the police had tracked them through Henrik's phone, Musa continued on foot. After hiding his bag, he checked into the motel where Simon and Bashir had stayed earlier. Musa was happy to finally sleep in comfort. Later, while washing his face, he didn't notice Simon and Bashir sneaking up behind him. Musa was sure Simon and Bashir couldn't have survived. They demanded to know where the bag was. Musa claimed that his Viking friend had thrown the bag into the river, but of course the guys didn't believe him. Volunteers, along with the police, were searching for Martin in the forest. When Anne found her husband lying under spruce branches, she burst into tears. Martin kept repeating for her not to touch him, and had no rational explanation for the husband's behavior. Martin declared that life in civilization wasn't for him, and he wanted freedom and a divorce. These words enraged Anne. She slapped her husband, accusing him of selfishness. He only thought about himself, not about the children and wife. Officer Tor pulled the furious woman away from Martin. He was arrested. From the window of the police car, Martin saw his daughters and couldn't hold back his tears. At the police station, Martin was charged with several offenses, including armed robbery and resisting arrest. Martin asked Officer Oand for permission to call his wife. Oand couldn't understand how Martin had come up with the idea of divorcing such an amazing woman. Everyone needs a break from time to time, but that doesn't mean we're allowed to abandon our families. Oand would give anything to have his wife back, who had passed away of a heart attack a few years ago. Now he was all alone. Oand promised to give Martin the phone if he told him where Musa was. Martin replied that he was probably not far from Gudalen. Oand ordered Martin to come with them. At the motel, Oand saw the stolen car and realized that Musa had been found by his old friends. Oand knocked on the room door. Simon gave Musa one last chance to reveal where the bag was, or he would shoot, but not at Musa but at the officer. This forced Musa to confess that he had hidden the bag outside. Simon went out the back door. Meanwhile, despite his hands being cuffed, Martin managed to reach Oivand's phone. Simon snuck up on the officer from behind. While dialing his wife, Martin didn't notice when Simon and Bashir knocked Oivand out. Anne didn't answer the phone, and Martin left her a voicemail, tearfully apologizing. He was willing to do anything to get his family back. Suddenly Martin noticed Simon and Bashir leading Musa out of the motel. Martin was powerless to do anything. Oivand told him to get out of the car and removed his handcuffs, of which there was only one pair. After that, Oivand silently took a rifle, while Martin noticed his furs in the trunk of the police car. Oivand aimed the rifle at Simon and Bashir. A shootout ensued. When Simon pointed his gun at Oivand, Martin shot an arrow, injuring Simon. Taking advantage of this, Oivand also fired a shot, taking Bashir's life, and then continued the chase. Sneaking up from the side, Simon wounded Oivand. Musa in turn also fired, taking Simon's life. Martin didn't know how to help Oivand. But he didn't need help, he just wanted to reunite with his wife as soon as possible. Before leaving this world forever, Oivand advised Martin to return to his family. Martin couldn't leave Musa here. In his final moments, Oivand felt at peace. Martin and Musa made it to the last ferry. Thus their thrilling adventure came to an end. It was time to return to civilization. Martin learned the most important lesson of his life: nothing is more important than family. Share in the comments, could you give up everything and go live in the forest? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel not to miss more exciting new products. Also, the authors will be pleased if you leave your opinion in the comments.